I think we can start. Meanwhile, the audience will take up their headphones. Once again, we greet you here today. My name is Aram Pachyan. I am the founder and director at Literarische Foundation. Literarische Foundation implements projects to develop Armenian book market, to promote writing and reading in Armenia, and to represent Armenian literature and culture globally. It's a pleasure to greet you today at this panel discussion entitled Looking for a Place, Armenian Literature in Europe. This event is planned and implemented with the support of Konrad Adenauer Foundation South Caucasus and the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture and Sports of the Republic of Armenia. I have been working as a literary agent for Armenian writers for around 14 years. Which means that I have been asking to myself the question about the place of Armenian literature on the global literary field and publishing market. Literature is not a country with a border to have a specific place, a location on the map. But we have a tendency to systemize everything, giving it names, categories. So at different times and occasions, we, Armenians, have been a part of different literary and publishing communities, regions, and territories. Sometimes we're Europe, sometimes it's Asia. We are an Eastern Partnership country in the European listings of projects and grant schemes. We are a part of Black Sea literature at some of the projects. So sometimes they recognize us as an ex-Soviet country, a label that we have been trying to get rid of for over 30 years now, more than 30 years now. So where would the location of Armenian literature be if we had to draw a global literary map? This and other questions about literature created in Armenian language by the writers who we call Generation Independence writers of Armenia will be discussed today here. Before the discussion starts, I would like also to give a stage to Mr. Stefan Malerius, the head of the regional program Political Dialogue South Caucasus of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, for a short introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arevik. Very warm welcome on behalf of Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And a brief reflection on the title, Looking for a Place, Armenian Literature in Europe. It's a little bit a different perspective than the one you just heard from Arevik. Geography matters, but so does culture, language, and literature. If we look at the map of Europe from here, from Frankfurt, Armenia appears to be at the periphery. If we think of Armenian literature, and if we're really honest here in Frankfurt, we just don't know. But therefore we are here as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, as Literarische Foundation, and the Ministry of Culture to listen and to find out. Armenia and Armenian literature is looking for its place, and it is doing so in Europe, not in Asia, I would say so, and not in Eurasia. Armenia's place is here. Then politics matters alongside with geography and culture. And I have to say this representing a German political foundation. Politically, Armenia has found its place in the last 6-7 years. And its place is in Europe as a member of the family of liberal democracies. As Konrad Adenauer Foundation, we were happy to help Armenia finding its place in Europe, and we are now happy to support Armenian writers discussing about their place in Europe. Thank you very much, Arevik, for the wonderful and trustful cooperation over the last years. Thank you to the Ministry for supporting this event. Thank you for your interest in Armenian literature, and I'm sure we will have a wonderful discussion right now, moderated by Jürgen Becker, Deputy Director of the Literarisches Colloquium Berlin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for making this possible, dear Arevik, dear Stefan. And we want to talk about the place and the contribution of Armenian literature to Europe. And I want to start with a short introduction to the speakers of today. This is Aram Pachyan. He is a writer, an acclaimed writer of the so-called independence generation. We are going to talk about this later. His first novel was a bestseller, Goodbye Bird was the name. He was a writer in residence at the International Writing Program of the University of Iowa, which is a very prestigious program. And he's the author of 5 books, and some of them have been translated into other languages. There's also a German translation of one book, PF, which is a book of lyrical prose, I would say, and it was published at Kolchis Verlag last year, translated by Wiebke Zollmann and Anahit Avakian. We have here Tigran Amiryan. He's the founder and president of CSN Lab, Cultural and Social Narratives Laboratory, an NGO. I think it's better you explain a little bit what does that mean?
This organization?
Yeah.
It's cultural organization, it's simply, and through the culture and art, we're fighting for democracy in our country, shortly.
Okay. You're also a writer and a scholar, and you have worked a lot about the memory, migration and memory. We have Anush Kocharyan, which I know best because she was an author at residence in the LCB where I work, Literarisches Colloquium Berlin. Anush is a writer, she's a poet. 2 years ago, a poetry collection was published in Armenia, and she's also a cultural manager, the general manager of the Hoover State Chamber Choir. And at this moment, she's working on her first novel. Everybody's waiting for her novel to come out, to be finished. And we have Sargis Hovsepyan. Sargis is also a writer and a screenwriter. He has started a publishing house, the Metro Publishing House in Yerevan. So talking about the place and the role of literature in Armenia, Armenian literature, what is that? So I thought, well, there's maybe not only one literature, there are many literatures of Armenia. There is a huge diaspora. We have the literature that is produced, written and read in Armenia itself. So maybe you can describe a little bit the most significant tendencies of nowadays literature in Armenia.
Thanks for the question. I'm switching to Armenian. Շնորհակալություն եւ
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It is very much important for me to participate in this kind of event and to speak in these crisis times about literature. We have words all over the world and diverse confrontations. It is very much important to speak about culture, about literature, and by doing this, we try to contribute to stopping the hate waves, violence waves we observe in the world. Speaking about the Armenian literature, I must say I do agree with you. We don't have only the Armenian literature. This is a diverse Armenian literature. It is diversity of Armenian literature. And literature itself is about being diverse and multiple. And Armenian literature expresses all these characteristics in the literature world. Starting from 19th century, there is a question, what is national literature at all? Armenian literature being diverse and multiple, in multiple formats, under diverse cultures, it brings different questions with it, and one of the questions is, what is the national literature? Where are the frontiers? Where are the borders of the national literatures? What do we speaking about national literature? Armenian literature had diverse expressions in different countries. Armenian literature, we know, in France, for example, has different modes of expression. Different Armenian poets and writers work in France, in Lebanon, in Syria, also in our region, in Russia, etc. All these literatures are a part of Armenian literature, and its diversity, on one hand, creates an interesting map of Armenian literature, but also leads to certain complexities. For example, this kind of events, you need a short answer to the question, what is the Armenian literature and where is it? It is difficult to answer this question by one sentence in one way. Besides, in certain countries where the Armenian literature is developed, it is developed not because a writer is there and he or she is writing intensively, but also institutionally. For example, in Turkey and in France, for the Armenians in Istanbul, they are very active and they are writing intensively and publishing intensively. If we speak about Republic of Armenia, and speaking about Armenian literature as the literature of Armenia, also here we do not have one answer to the question, what is the Armenian literature? Also here is very diverse and multiple, the literature, because of the same in the society. So we see different tendencies in the area of Armenian literature. If we speak about Armenian literature in Armenia, we can name a couple of tendencies which were developed, and one of the characteristics is the anthropological turn which developed in Armenian literature. And it is necessary to understand it, to understand the developments in our society. Then we have the memory novel, and we have here the representatives of this tendency, of this style. Very important is also for the contemporary Armenian literature, the literature around the gender issues. This is literature created by very different people, and the role of women is immense in this topic. Women have leading role in literature currently, especially while speaking about gender equality. There are very different aspects. Also, visual language enters the Armenian market. We have Armenian graphic novels. It is a very important tendency, direction selected by Armenian writers.
European picture you are doing, and I wonder what is what about the generation issue? You said that some of you they belong to the new generation, and a generation is normally an antithesis to a generation before. You were all born in the Soviet Union, in the very late Soviet Union maybe, but still in the Soviet Union, and you grew up, and your formative experiences were independence, yeah, and all the problems that came, and the war, and so on. So where's the antithesis to another generation? Maybe you can tell us something about that. When you started as a writer, was there something you wanted to be opposite?
No. Thank you for this question.
It is a very large and interesting question, which is difficult to answer. In my case, I'm a barrier of collective memory from Soviet times. I have childhood memories, which are very much important for me and which contributed to the definition and development of my perceptions of working with text. It is family memories, historical memories, which were transferred all the time and which are being reflected regularly in my works of the recent times. I have some attempts to return the collective memory issues. I tried to reflect in my novel. I tried to reflect on the history of tramways in Armenia. And my hero, my character, speaks about ruins of the system, and there is a river in Yerevan, Getar, which was covered or during the urban development after 2000s, and I try to speak about exile and about a past which is for me is not really past because it lives in me and it is with me here in present. This exile is a comparison with Getar, with the river and with tramway, and it is connected with the issue of not reflecting the past and not willing to think of past. I think the frontier here, the borders to the ruining and to creating anew, I think it is very difficult to draw those borderlines. I still make parallels between past and present. The Soviet past defined in a certain way, not a certain way, but a deep way, my historical memory. And you just cannot say, I want to get rid of that memory. It is not dependent on your willingness. There is not an issue of revolting. It is rather an issue of dialogue and of bridging, and I tried to, with Makartic Armen, I tried to speak, to create a dialogue, and I speak about the win of the revolution, that euphoria, and to me it is the fixing the exile, which does not relate to the death. It is just about, my issue was to create something new by dialogue. If you allow me, I would like to take up this question. I was born in the Soviet era and I graduated from the school in parallel with the collapse of Soviet Union. So the influence of Soviet Union, I felt it. I had it. If we speak about antithesis or if we speak about confrontation, there is no clear antithesis and no clear confrontation, but I want to speak about issues we had in the Soviet times, even if it is sometimes difficult to push a button and to disconnect from the Soviet influence. Nevertheless, the conscious act of a writer, of an author from my side, this is where I have my antithesis. I try to confront with this. I don't want to accept the command and the narratives which were obliged by Soviet culture and which was kind of imperative for Armenia. There were certain heroes, certain narratives, certain stories which were considered by that empire to be important for them. So I'm a representative of a nation with experience of rethinking all this, considering our times, of course.
Say, generation independence, is this something, a label that you would accept for your literature?
I would like to start from a very interesting piece, and I would like to greet everyone and thank for this event. In published press, I'm in the group who were born in the Soviet times. I was born with a Soviet certificate of birth, but the country was then very soon independent. So I'm one of the representatives of the first independence generation. I have long times, both in regard of memory and regard of geography, I'm representative of the group situated in ruins. I attended a school with certain characters and specifics of Soviet era. I have heard in my family very often that there are certain difficulties after collapse of Soviet Union. As a child, I grew up in nostalgic circumstances, and this was my surrounding, and I was studying it and observing this in my first steps of being journalist, calling us independence generation. We need to talk a lot of issues. We need to discuss whether we have nostalgia in these topics. We need to discuss whether we can name our literature post-Soviet literature. Personally, I think not anymore, not after 2000s. So I don't think that our time will satisfy to answer this question from all sides and comprehensively, but there are issues in novel of Sargis, of Aram, and there are these aspects also in my novel to come soon.
About the collective memory. When I heard collective memory, I thought, oh, he will talk about the genocide. But is this a part of the collective memory, or is it more the 7 decades of Soviet ruling Armenia?
Of course, certainly. One of the most important topics of the collective historic memory, one of the most important catastrophes, disasters, which is a complex topic. It is another topic of discussion whether we can rethink this disaster. I would like say one thing. Armenian genocide, the literature around this topic, whether the writers represent this topic interesting enough, correct enough to the world to wake up more deeper interest towards this topic. I think this should not be the matter of discussion. Thinking around this kind of topic, around this kind of disaster, should not be concerned by being interesting. it should be just a transfer of evidence, transfer of memory. The question whether this topic is not any more interesting in the literature outside of the Armenian borders. I think Armenian writers, okay, personally, I myself, I will never allow this kind of thought, because repeating, it is not an issue of writer thought or rethinking. Yes, this topic should be repeated, should be again mentioned, as long as it is not recognized by the side, by the party who did it. I would like to briefly add, I agree with Aram, at least in that regard, that the description of any trauma or punishment of a crime, regret for the crime, it is something logical. We have different successful situations among different nations in the world with successful solution of this situation, and it was possible only by regret, by acceptance, by recognition. As long as this regret is not given as a basis, of a ground of further communication, it is difficult to build up anything new. It is not only about genocide, it is also about, for example, Stalinist repressions in the Soviet era. It seems that in 60s, 70s, people were rehabilitated, but we see that the processes in opposite direction start again, because if the perpetrator or if the party which did the crime does not recognize it, does not accept it, it leads to a repetition. If we speak about genocide and literature at the same time, I think we should state at the first that genocide as a basic topic is very much important for the Armenians in diaspora. We spoke about mapping, about geography. People appeared in those countries. Yes, they are well integrated, but they continue creating literature in Armenian language. But the reason why they appeared in those countries, in those diverse cultures, it is that trauma. And for diaspora, it is not only important to mention the genocide, but it is just important to write in Armenian, because after the genocide, the writing in Armenian was one of the possibilities to keep Armenian identity. It is interesting to speak about it here in Germany, because Germany knows well enough what is it to work with complex memory. And Aleda Asman, in one of her books, starts the books with mentioning Armenians, how the backwards memory works, how that memory about the Armenian genocide is strong in Armenian diaspora. And for the literature, this topic is very much important. Speaking about today's literature, we must mention, if genocide is about traumatic past memory, this trauma is different layers in Armenian society, and this is kind of palimpsest, a semi-layer reality. These are the layers of Gulag times, of Stalin repressions, of First Karabakh War, Second Karabakh War. And this traumatic experience have all their layers, and you can read them in the works of Armenian writers. I think it is important to mention this. And there is one more thing I would like to mention, that genocide, the Armenian genocide during the in Osmanic Turkey, it is an issue not only for Armenian literature but also for Turkish literature, and we observe today what big role plays this topic in democratic Turkey, in democratic movements and waves in Turkey, as well as we observe how the Turkish writers reflect this topic.
Thank you. The term postcolonial is very popular nowadays. Does it refer to the Armenian situation? I heard that in Armenia, for example, there's a lot of books sold in the bookshops, translations from via Russia, or Russian books. So what is the situation? Would you describe this situation as a post-colonial situation? You, maybe?
Okay, yes.
I think surely we can partly name it post-colonial. It is rather kind of inertia. The Soviet influence is still there. The moral center is currently occupied with different other questions and does not use a lot of resources, that does not dedicate a lot of resources to the peripheриc areas. That inertia is there. There is also a tendency of confronting that inertia. Thus, we can say that we are in that post-colonial situation, meaning that the processes, there are certain processes between center and periphery. It is a generation issue, definitely, as my colleagues already mentioned. There is certain nostalgic issues regarding the Soviet past. Some people lost something and miss what they lost. But I think there is also a tendency of overcoming, of stopping that inertia. I'm not sure whether the term post-colonial would be correct to apply, but I think I observe the situation I described. If you allow me to add, I have a couple of years of experience of working on a topic. And in Armenian culture, in the culture in Armenia, when we speak about colonial past or complex, difficult past, we receive at once the question, which empire do you mean? The Soviet Union, Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire, what do you mean? So the Armenian perception, the cultural perception of that colonial past, it is also multi-layered. There are certain colonial layers which we observe in our culture. Besides, the question comes up, what is correct to use, how far is it correct to use the post prefix in this word? Do we have really post-colonial? Well, we observe that all post-colonial studies in our regions, they are all conducted in Russia, not only in regard of natural resources, but also the intellectual resources. They go to Russia. And then we have rather a neo-colonial situation rather than post-colonial. And also today, after 2022, 2023, we are today in the book fair, and we are in the Armenian book fair part, and we see how the Russian writers, Russian actors try to occupy their space in Armenian literature, not to get integrated, not to get included, but to get their space. I would like to add to Tigran on the prefix post. In our situation, and I think it is typical not only for us, the term and the name of the situation is created much earlier than the situation itself. This is not us who use the resources. It is the situation itself, the situation which is not yet there. It is still in its developing phase. The situation gets a name. We are in a process. It is not a final, but it has got already a finalized name you used in your question.
Another problem, let us say, it's translation. Of course, there should be translation of international authors into Armenian, and also, of course, Armenian literature translated into other languages. How is the situation now? So, are there enough translators in the world, in Germany, maybe in the US, in France, in the big languages? And is there an exchange also with the international discussion? For example, Annie Ernaux, is she translated into Armenian? Or so these authors where everybody discusses about Knausgard or David Foster Wallace, all these names. Do you read them in Armenian translation?
Annie Ernaux անտարես հրատարակչությամբ Annie Ernaux-ի մի քանի վեպեր լույս.
Some works of Annie Ernaux are translated in Armenian, and I read them in Armenian, and I want to stress the importance of this. It is very much the attitude of Ernaux as anthropologist, as author, with deep thoughts, and these translations are an important nutrition for Armenian literature. Traditionally, Armenians are a translating nation, and the translation has its own place and important role in our culture. The opposite direction, the translation of Armenian authors into other languages, I think this is an issue. First of all, we need more authors, more translators first of all, for belletristic. We have scarce resources for this, and maybe this is the reason that we need longer time. There are a lot of good translators, but it is difficult to translate literature. We make small steps, difficult steps, on our path of translating Armenian literature into other languages, but these small steps are very much important because we don't have any other choice. We are being translated. Unfortunately, these are not the big publishers in Europe and in West who publish, for example, my books, the translations of my books. But I'm also happy this is a kind of confrontation on the huge market. We try to confront to the huge waves on the market, and it is also very much important. Why not? It is not important confrontation, but it is important to me. I think in the future, if translators will be educated and if they like the literature, then possibly we will be able to leave the borders more frequently. I would like to add, if you allow me, a small comment on translation before that. In my opinion, the translation from Armenian into other languages and from other languages into Armenian, this is a political question. As a scientist, I think that the translation is always possible, and it is an interesting process to translation. If we speak about translation from Armenian into other languages, into European languages, it is really a political question. How open is the respective culture towards you, how far it is ready to perceive you, because translation is a creative work. We have more and more translations of contemporary Armenian writers into European languages. When we speak about translations into Armenian, it is also a political question, and this question is directly linked to your previous question on post-colonial situation and about decolonization. We know that we read for very long years translations either from Russian of international authors, or we read the international authors directly in Russian. So in this period, it is very much important as a step in decolonization via literature to translate from other languages directly. I would like to add from my side that we are today in a situation where it seems that we all know each other well enough, that Europeans know the Soviet nations. We all are neighbors and we know each other very well. And then we suddenly find out we don't know each other well enough. We don't know well enough the huge empire which has certain phantom pains currently, and especially the best ways to get to know that empire closer and better is to translate directly the literature of nations represented in that empire. As a representative of Armenian literature and Armenian nation, I think it would be great to be translated into other languages, and it can be helpful to make on our way to make possible to explain to the world what is happening right now.
Is always also true to Georgia, your neighbor country, Georgia, because it has a very small language. We didn't know too much about this, but the great boost was the Frankfurt Book Fair 2018. So it was guest of honor here, and we had, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 new translations of Georgian literature. And they are somehow now on the map here. Yeah? And the motto of this guest of honor presentation here was "Made by Characters." Do you have a motto for an Armenian guest of honor presentation? If you have just an idea about this, maybe in 2033.
Yes, at հարցին ուղղակիորեն
I don't have a direct answer for this question, of course, but it is very much important that also in this discussion we mentioned how important the memory itself is for the contemporary Armenian literature. And we mentioned the diverse geographies of Armenian literature. Whenever I think about Armenian literature, I have the title Displaced Memories, Transplaced Memories, and I think it would be interesting to speak about Armenian literature in the context of that displacement. And the second important issue is the translation, which was very much important for Armenians during centuries. Translating, it is not about Armenian language. Armenian translators worked also between other languages, and there is a huge heritage of these translations, and I think the reflection on this could be very interesting. I would like to add one thing. Again, it is too early to create a motto now, but a place should be, in wide meaning, should be important. And that we already today speak that a place is both Armenia, diaspora, it is the place where we speak, it is the place where we have not yet finally created memory, place, text, memory, the complex diversity of all these three. Again, we speak about a place, but we do not look for the place, but we try to define the place. I don't have to add anything. Thank you. My colleagues, Anush and Tigran, said everything. Memory of memory, I think, is a term, and I recall the book of Maria Stepanova, Memory of Memory. But I think whenever the day will come when Armenia will be the guest of honor, we will gather and brainstorm on the motto, and definitely we will have the precise motto. Definitely until that time we will have other texts. The most important thing that we have no new words by that time.
We have 5 seconds left, so this is enough for 10 questions from the audience. Maybe not 10, but maybe 1 question. So I don't know if anybody has something really important to say or to ask. Yes, you? Do we have a microphone? Yeah.
Thank you. I address my question to the panelists. You've been to Western countries. What feelings did you have as writers, as authors? I'm in Germany since 7 years. I'm not in Europe. I'm in Western Europe. And it seems to be for Armenia an aim, a goal to reach very much, a desired aim that they are not Europeans yet and need to be European. What is your feeling when you are? I'm not sure whether I understood the question, but as far as I got your question, Armenia had influence of different cultures during its history, but the Armenian nation established itself a long time ago, and nothing can influence the European origin of that nation, even if it was under some 100 years under influence of different nations. We are still the carriers of the cultural codes, cultural value system, which is the basis of the Western culture currently. I don't think we need to become Europeans.
Thank you so much. Displaced memories, a very diverse present. I think we just, at the beginning of the discussion, I thank you for joining this discussion. I think you will stay here tomorrow, maybe at the Armenian stand. Please have a look at the Armenian stand in 4.1. It's a very interesting, a very good place to get to know new Armenian authors. Thank you so much.